And we back, baby cakes, with another daily reflection on this podcast project, the Daily Vedantic. The reflection that's been going through my head today is inspired by a line in the Bhagavad Gita where it talks about how a philosophical life renders all actions attractive. We often think that a philosophical life, a life with a spiritual pursuit, is a huge sacrifice at best. Or at worst, you're just twiddling your thumbs in some cabin in the woods if you're a philosopher. In other words, we think it's some isolated or irrelevant pursuit of the mind. And this philosophy, at least, says that could not be further from the truth. I can speak from my own experience. Right now, running 3 companies and 3 investment funds, 3 little kids, surfing earlier today, this podcast project, Yoga for Your Intellect, another podcast project on the same philosophy. Life could not be more dynamic. It's the most dynamic life has ever been. And yet it also feels like it's the most effortless life has ever been. So seamless, so elegant. It all just flows. There is a beautiful rhythm to each aspect, but that's not even the most interesting aspect of the application of this philosophy. I would have thought that would easily be the most fascinating aspect of applying these philosophical principles that are, like I said in the last episode, a manual for living life well. I would have thought, okay, that is the pinnacle. The most fascinating aspect is that they're all thriving. My 20s is filled with failure after failure after failure. And I had a friend today with an AI personality test and career coach company called Apt that me and a co-founder started 2 years ago. He asked how many users did it have or how's it going? And I think we're at like 500,000 users. And he shook his head and he's like, dude, everything you touch turns to gold. I'm not doing any of it. One, very practically speaking, Tomas, my co-founder, he's really on the hands of the dials and all of the levers driving so much of the progress, really, all the day-to-day progress. But he was even interested in starting Apt because of a philosophical approach to life that he had seen for years leading up to me saying, hey, you want to build this idea with me? This is not meant to be any bravado or gloating whatsoever. I'm just as blown away by this as my friend was, that it's all just not just flowing through our lives, but just working and thriving. And it's all this philosophy. Living this philosophy renders your actions attractive. You handle conflict well. You say no to the right things. Wisdom is saying yes to the right things. And you end up saying yes to the right things, no to all of the wrong things. The sea, nearly the infinite sea of wrong things because of the clarity one gets with this philosophy. It's true that this philosophy has a bit of a cost to it. When you jump into this philosophy, no one around you knows what the hell you're getting yourself into. It is not, at least here in the West, 1 in 1,000 have heard the word Vedanta. It's not going to be what your friends think is cool to spend time reflecting on these philosophical concepts. It's like a child that grows out of the toys that the younger siblings still care about, but the older child just grows out of it. When you start to digest and reflect on these philosophical concepts within Advaita Vedanta, they just make so much sense. They start to click in a way that a spiritual path for many people had never clicked before. Philosophical path, certainly, rarely ever clicked because most philosophies are not very practical. This is so practical and profound, and the mix between the two is so unique, so simple, so straightforward, always say, just go listen to the first episode of this podcast to hear the entirety of the podcast and how it weaves these simple all the way to the profound together so elegantly to describe ourselves, to describe the world, to describe what's happening, to describe reality from illusion. And all of these things are so straightforward that they start to just make sense, and you grow out of things that you were really into before. It can feel like there's some distance from you and others in the beginning, a little bit of distance that wasn't there before when you loved maybe like rage until 2 a.m. because now you're like, man, I've developed my intellect to the point where I can see the end in the beginning, and I kind of want to get in bed by like 11 or 12. So you start to leave the late night parties with friends a little bit earlier than others. Maybe you don't even drink as much. Start to live a healthier approach to your daily life, even just on the physical side. Start taking care of yourself more. And these little things can lead to that distance that the older child maybe seemingly has by not being so fascinated and infatuated with those toys that they were obsessed with a year prior. But we are built to grow out of our obsession with toys. We've been doing it our whole lives. Some people stick to it, hardcore, stick to their toys that make their joys, as the great poem says, and they get stuck. So when we start to take a path towards a higher version of ourselves, higher approach to our work, to the world, it can feel like a little bit of distance. It can feel like a little bit of distance in the beginning. But over time, the example that we lead, not preaching through words, never giving any lectures, but you leaving to go get better rest at midnight, 1 or 2 other friends start to follow you. You living a healthier approach to your physical, your mental, your intellectual pursuits. You start to become a lighthouse for your community to do the same slowly but surely. You influence your community in maybe the healthiest way you can, which is by example. I think it was Lincoln that said, leading by example isn't just the best way to influence your children, it's the only way. Living out an example of pursuing the higher in your relationships, in your work, your spiritual, philosophical pursuit. This reflection is on the sobriety that, that does give some distance in the beginning. And for some friends, it might be distance for the rest of your lives because you feel like, man, that is a terrible influence on my life being around that person. And as you pursue the higher, as you pursue a healthier approach to your daily life, you recognize, man, there is a community that encourages me, energizes me, lifts me up, elevates me, helps me progress. And then there's a community in my life that is the opposite, that discourages progress, that pulls me down, that dissipates my energy when I'm with them. And as you take towards this path, you get the clarity to see one from the other. But another thing that will start to happen is that everything you start doing, everything you're doing is rendered attractive. You start doing things the right way, the humble way, the objective way, the way with clarity, with perspective, with foresight. The things that you do start to flourish and to thrive. There can be some distance in relationships in the beginning, especially in pursuing a philosophy that perhaps no one around you, that was the case for me, no one around me was pursuing. A philosophical approach, much less knew what Vedanta was. In 100 years, I have a feeling every Everyone's going to be studying this philosophy. Because 100 years ago, all of the titans, nearly all of them were. I mention them all the time on this podcast. East and West. And the West, from Emerson and Thoreau to the grandmother of the women's rights movement, Margaret Fuller, to Carl Jung, Aldous Huxley. The list is insane. Schopenhauer, Schrödinger, Einstein, and his preternatural understanding that the universe was, in some way, a non-dualistic manifestation of divine logistics. He's famously a fan of Spinoza's approach to spirituality, which was a non-dualistic approach that was so strange and different to his time in the Renaissance that he's largely, not only was he quite literally excommunicated from his community, but he was largely forgotten and has had quite the resurgence through Einstein being like, dude, out of all of the Renaissance thinkers, especially the philosophers, Spinoza was probably the most right, and at the time was seen as the most wrong. And each of these titans, they are examples of going against the grain, diving into something that their friends might not have been, but finding truth. And their work, their impact, flourishing. Finding truth, and on the other side of a bit of separation, perhaps distance, being misunderstood, their work thriving, their impact flourishing for decades, and for some of them centuries. That is today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. If you've ever felt a bit of separation when you pursue the higher, listen to this or re-listen to it, because you are not alone. We'll see you next time.